He was the richest man in Rome. Crassus built an empire of wealth, exploiting fire, war, and politics, but his hunger for more led him to challenge the Parthians and to suffer a punishment that shocked the ancient world. In the heart of the Roman Empire, during the time when Julius Caesar was conquering Gaul and Pompey was expanding Rome's influence to the east, another figure was quietly carving his path to power. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man who, rather than seeking glory on the battlefield, found his way to greatness through wealth and ambition. He would ultimately become the richest Roman in history, but his end would be wrapped in legend and tragedy. Born around 115 BCE into a noble family, Crassus had little interest in military conquest like many of his peers. Instead, from an early age, he showed an exceptional talent for business and an insatiable drive for wealth. While others honed their skills for war, he sharpened his mind for a different kind of battle, one for property, gold, and influence. His first big break came during the brutal proscriptions of Sulla, when political enemies were marked for death and their estates were seized. While most people saw only destruction and misfortune, Crassus saw an opportunity. He purchased the confiscated land at ridiculously low prices, often forcing desperate families to sell in fear of their own lives. This was how he began to amass a fortune that would soon make him one of the wealthiest men in Rome. But Crassus's most notorious scheme was as clever as it was ruthless. In a city that was constantly at risk of fires, Crassus created Rome's first fire brigade. Unlike a typical fire brigade, his wasn't about saving property, it was about making money. He organized 500 slaves who were trained to respond not with water, but with negotiation. When a fire broke out, Crassus's men would rush to the scene, and if the property owner agreed to sell their property at a low price, Crassus would order his men to extinguish the flames. If the owner refused, the fire would simply burn until there was nothing left to save. Through such ruthless tactics, Crassus quickly grew his wealth and influence. It's said that his fortune was estimated at around 200 million sesterces, an amount worth billions in today's terms. But even this vast sum wasn't enough for him. No Roman is truly wealthy, he once remarked, unless he can fund an army from his own purse. And so, the man who turned fire into profit and fear into leverage set his sights higher. Crassus's ambition knew no bounds, and though history would ultimately remember him for a tragic end, his story began in a different arena, one defined by cold calculation, ambition, and an unrelenting thirst for power. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. Despite his immense wealth, Marcus Crassus carried a quiet burden, a deep, unhealed wound that no amount of gold could ever soothe. It wasn't a lack of riches that troubled him, but something far more elusive: comparison. While Crassus built his fortune with estates and silver, his rivals were earning something far more valuable in Rome: military glory. Pompey the Great had won triumphs in distant provinces. Julius Caesar's name echoed with the fame of his conquests in Gaul. Crassus, despite his pivotal role in crushing Spartacus's rebellion, remained in their shadow, his name overshadowed by theirs. This imbalance gnawed at him, like rust eating away at precious metal. No matter how many lands he acquired or how much wealth he amassed, envy slowly corroded his soul. He had everything money could buy, except the one thing that truly mattered in Rome: glory earned on the battlefield. At the age of 60, when most men would have long since sought peace, Crassus's desire for immortality still burned bright. His gaze turned east, to the Parthian Empire, a land rich in treasure and renowned for its formidable warriors. The Parthians were famous for their cavalry, heavily armored cataphracts and archers who could shoot while retreating, a deadly maneuver that would later be known as the Parthian shot. For Crassus, Parthia wasn't just another campaign. It was the chance to erase any doubts about his place in Roman history. It was an opportunity to join Pompey and Caesar in the ranks of legendary conquerors. He saw military glory, political power, and even more wealth glittering in the sunlit cities of the East. The stories of Parthia ignited his imagination. Ambition turned to obsession. For Crassus, the march to Parthia wasn't just a war. It was his final gamble for the one thing he had never been able to buy: eternal glory. In 53 BCE, Marcus Crassus, driven by ambition and ignoring all warnings, embarked on a campaign that would ultimately seal his fate. Despite ominous signs and even Rome's religious disapproval, he led 7 legions, around 40,000 men, eastward, intent on conquering the Parthian Empire. From the start, misfortune seemed to follow the expedition. During the departure ceremony, a priest made a disastrous mistake, reversing the traditional prayer and inadvertently invoking curses instead of blessings. Crassus, undeterred, pressed on. But as his army crossed the Euphrates River, a violent storm destroyed the bridge, claiming many lives. Still, Crassus dismissed these as mere bad luck, refusing to see them as warnings. As the army moved deeper into Parthian territory, Crassus's overconfidence became his greatest flaw. He ignored critical military advice and rejected any offer of alliances that could have helped. His son, Publius, an experienced commander who had served under Caesar, urged caution, but Crassus would not listen. Meanwhile, the Parthian general Surena, young, brilliant, and well-resourced, was watching. He traveled with a formidable army, complete with thousands of camels for baggage, 200 carriages for his concubines, and an elite force of cataphracts and horse archers. The two armies finally met near the plains of Carrhae, in what is now modern-day Turkey. Crassus, eager for glory and wealth, dismissed defensive tactics and ordered an aggressive advance, against all advice. What followed was a disaster. The Parthians employed a ruthless strategy, with mounted archers launching wave after wave of arrows, then quickly retreating before the Romans could retaliate. The Roman legions, renowned for their discipline but built for close combat, were helpless on the open terrain. The arrows pierced their armor, creating panic and chaos. In desperation, Publius led a cavalry charge to break the siege, but it was a fatal mistake. Isolated from the main force, he and his men were surrounded. After a fierce battle, and with no way out, Publius asked his shield-bearer to end his life rather than be captured. His head was severed and sent back to Crassus on a spear. When the messengers brought Publius's head to his father, the psychological toll was devastating. The man who had once been one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Rome now faced a loss that no amount of gold could fix. The campaign, once about glory, had now become the beginning of his downfall. With his army shattered and surrounded, Crassus had no choice but to negotiate with the Parthian general, Surena. It was his last chance. What happened next is blurred by time, a mix of fact and legend. Roman accounts say Crassus went to parley with Surena, but something went horribly wrong during the tense meeting. Some versions suggest the Parthians tried to capture him by force. Others point to a tragic misunderstanding. In the chaos that followed, Crassus was killed, his dreams of glory silenced on foreign soil. Then came the moment that turned his death into myth. The Parthians, fully aware of Crassus's insatiable greed, decided to punish him in a fitting way. As Roman historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio later recounted, they poured molten gold down his throat, mocking him with the words, "You thirsted for gold, now drink it." This image burned into Roman memory, a man consumed by wealth, ultimately killed by it. The symbolism was undeniable. Crassus had built his empire on money and cunning, but it was money that led to his downfall. Historical truth becomes slippery over time. Plutarch wrote his biography of Crassus nearly 2 centuries after the event. Dio came even later. Neither of them were witnesses, and similar stories appear across different cultures, most notably the tale of King Croesus of Lydia, also executed with molten gold. Such legends may be more folklore than fact. Most modern historians believe that Crassus was likely killed during the negotiation or executed by beheading, as was customary for enemies of Parthia. His head was reportedly sent to King Orodes II, who, in a macabre twist, received it while watching a play by Euripides. So why does the molten gold story endure? Because it fits the narrative too perfectly. Romans loved stories of poetic justice, of a man's end reflecting his greatest flaw. Whether true or not, the tale of Crassus's death with molten gold in his mouth became a powerful symbol. Wealth cannot protect you from the consequences of unchecked ambition. His legacy is not one of triumph but of tragic irony, forever remembered as the man who died with the very substance he worshipped. The aftermath of Crassus's disastrous campaign was nothing short of catastrophic. Rome suffered a crushing defeat. Around 20,000 of its legionaries were killed, and another 10,000 were captured. These prisoners were later resettled by the Parthians in the far corners of their empire. Even more humiliating, the Parthians seized the sacred legionary eagles, symbols of Roman military honor. The loss of these emblems wounded Rome's pride so deeply that it would take decades before Emperor Augustus managed to negotiate their return. Politically, Crassus's death destabilized the delicate balance of power in Rome. As the third member of the first triumvirate, he had been the quiet mediator between Caesar and Pompey. With his death, the tension between the two men erupted into civil war, setting the stage for the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. For the Parthians, the victory at Carrhae was a defining moment. It solidified their reputation as a nearly invincible force. No Roman general would achieve a decisive victory over them until Emperor Trajan nearly 170 years later. But Crassus's story holds meaning far beyond a military defeat. His life and death serve as a sobering reflection on ambition, pride, and the limits of wealth. Crassus had everything money could buy, except the one thing he craved most: lasting glory. In his relentless pursuit of it, he lost everything. Ironically, Crassus achieved immortality, not as a conqueror, but as a cautionary tale. The story of his death by molten gold, if true, would be the ultimate poetic justice. A man so consumed by wealth, killed by the very thing he worshipped. And even if the tale is a fabrication, its endurance speaks volumes about our desire to believe that life punishes our greatest flaws in fitting ways. Did Crassus really die with molten gold poured down his throat? Maybe not. But what matters is what that story represents: the tragic cost of unchecked ambition and greed. In Rome, it was said that every man had his price. Crassus, who knew the cost of everything, learned too late the true value of what money cannot buy: wisdom, restraint, and a dignified end. And so, the richest man in Rome didn't earn eternal fame for his fortune, but for the bitter golden death that turned him into a moral legend.